Come on.
You are so crazy, Jim Carrey.
There are people who can imitate celebrities.
Jim?
Jay Carrey? Oh my gosh. Great to see you. When did you grow into a man?
Well, I started growing in high school and stopped. Right around here.
And then there are people who can imitate them so well that the actual celebrity starts laughing at themselves. That's when a simple impression becomes something much more entertaining. Because imagine sitting across from someone, expecting a normal interview, and suddenly hearing your own voice coming back at your accent, your expression, your little habits. Even the things you probably never realized you did. What are you supposed to do? Laugh? Pretend it isn't accurate? Or admit that this person somehow knows you better than you know yourself? We've seen comedians imitate some of the biggest stars in the world. Actors copy their friends, and celebrities turn the tables by impersonating each other. Some reactions are polite. Some are completely shocked. And some celebrities simply lose it. So today, we're looking at some of the funniest celebrity impressions performed right in front of the people being impersonated. And trust me, a few of these get so accurate that even the celebrities themselves struggle to keep a straight face. A good celebrity impression isn't just about having a similar voice. Anyone can make their voice deeper or higher. The real trick is figuring out what makes that person instantly recognizable. Maybe it's the way they pause. Maybe it's their accent. Maybe it's the way they move their hands. Or maybe it's one tiny phrase they seem to use every 5 minutes. Once an impressionist finds that detail, they can exaggerate it just enough. And suddenly everyone in the room knows exactly who they're watching. One of the clearest examples comes from Jack Black. During a conversation connected to Minecraft, Black decided to give his version of Jason Momoa, and instead of simply copying Momoa's voice, he went after the entire personality. The laid-back attitude, the exaggerated confidence, that unmistakable larger-than-life energy. The performance works because Black understands something important. You don't need to reproduce every detail of a person. You just need to find the details that everybody remembers. And once those details are exaggerated, the audience does the rest. But sometimes the impression is built around something so specific that the celebrity immediately knows where the joke is going. That's what happened when comedian Godfrey turned his attention toward Jason Statham. Statham has one of those voices that is almost impossible to mistake. Deep, controlled, serious. Even when he's saying something completely ordinary, it can sound like he's about to walk into a high-stakes action movie. Godfrey took that recognizable quality and pushed it into absurd territory. The joke wasn't really about Statham himself. It was about the idea of taking that incredibly serious voice and putting it into a completely ridiculous situation. And that's why the real Statham's reaction becomes part of the comedy. Because when the person you're imitating is standing right there, the audience isn't just watching the impression anymore. They're watching the celebrity's face, waiting for the moment when they realize, okay, he's actually got me. And then there's Bryan Cranston. Most people know him for dramatic performances. So when someone like Cranston suddenly switches into an exaggerated impression of Kevin Hart, the surprise alone becomes funny. Hart's energy is almost the complete opposite of Cranston's more controlled screen presence. So watching Cranston suddenly adopt that frantic, animated personality creates an unexpected contrast. And this is one of the easiest ways to make an impression work. Don't imitate someone who's similar to you. Imitate someone who is completely different. The bigger the contrast, the bigger the laugh. But celebrity impressions become even more entertaining when the two people actually know each other. Because now the impression isn't based on what the public sees. It's based on what one celebrity notices about another. And nobody has turned that into a comedy routine quite like Kevin Hart and Dwayne Johnson. The two have spent years working together, appearing in interviews, and joking about each other's personality. So naturally, they know exactly where the weak spots are. When they start impersonating each other, they're not simply copying voices, they're copying attitudes. Kevin can exaggerate Dwayne's enormous confidence. Dwayne can turn Kevin's frantic energy into an entire character. And because both men know exactly what the other is doing, the jokes keep escalating. That's what makes their chemistry work. Neither one is trying to win. They're both trying to make the other person break character first. And once one of them starts laughing, the whole thing falls apart. That's usually when the audience gets the best reaction. There's another interesting side to this. Sometimes you don't really know how other people see you until somebody imitates you. You may think you have a completely normal way of speaking. Then your friend copies you. Suddenly, you realize you have a very specific way of saying things. Maybe you repeat certain words. Maybe you make the same expression whenever you're confused. Maybe you have a particular way of reacting when you're excited. Most of us don't notice these things because we're too busy being ourselves. An impressionist does notice them. That's literally their job. And that's why a great impression can feel strangely personal. For years, Jim Breuer has made a name for himself by doing impressions of other people, so you'd think he'd be almost impossible to surprise. He spent so much time studying other people's voices and mannerisms that he's probably used to hearing himself imitate everyone from actors to public figures. But eventually, the joke came back around. Breuer discovered that somebody had created an impression of him while doing an impression of someone else. And that creates a completely different situation. Think about it. You're a comedian whose job is to imitate people. Then someone imitates you while you're watching. Suddenly, you're the audience. And Breuer's reaction says everything. Because there's something almost uncomfortable about seeing your own personality exaggerated by someone else. You know immediately whether they got it right. And when they do, there isn't much you can say. You just laugh. That's one of the reasons celebrity impressions are so fascinating. They work like a mirror, but it's a slightly distorted mirror. The impressionist takes something real, then stretches it. Maybe the voice becomes deeper, the gestures become bigger, the personality becomes louder, and suddenly, the person you're watching looks ridiculous, while still being completely recognizable. That's a very difficult balance. Go too far, and the impression stops resembling the celebrity. Don't go far enough, and nobody laughs. The best performers find that tiny space in between. Then you have performers like Matt Friend, whose entire skill is built around recognizing those tiny differences between celebrities. One moment, he can sound like one person. Then he changes his posture, rhythm, and delivery. And suddenly you're listening to somebody completely different. His impression of Howard Stern is a perfect example of why vocal impressions can be so effective. The interesting part isn't simply the sound. It's the rhythm, the repeated habits, the way the conversation flowed, those tiny characteristics that regular viewers recognize without consciously thinking about. And when somebody reproduces them perfectly, your brain almost does a double take. You know it's an imitation, but for a second, it sounds like the real person is sitting there. That's the point where an impression stops being merely funny. It becomes impressive. And Friend doesn't limit himself to one celebrity. That's what makes performers like him so dangerous in an interview. You never quite know who they're going to imitate next. They can jump between personalities in seconds. And because the audience already knows these celebrities, every transition creates another little moment of recognition. It's almost like hearing someone change channels, except every channel is a different famous person. Professional impressionists aren't the only ones who can do this. Sometimes the funniest impressions come from actors who spend so much time around their co-stars that they've learned all their little habits. Tom Hiddleston is a perfect example. Audiences know him as Loki, but he's also developed a surprisingly good impression of Chris Hemsworth. And there's an extra layer to the joke. Hiddleston isn't just reproducing Hemsworth's Australian voice. He's combining Hemsworth's personality with the dramatic intensity of Loki. So you're essentially watching one Marvel character speaking through another. It shouldn't work, but it does. Because Hiddleston understands the personality behind the voice. And that's the secret again. The voice gets your attention. The personality makes the impression believable. You can imitate someone's accent perfectly and still fail. But if you understand how that person thinks, reacts, moves, and speaks, you can make a 10-second impression feel like an entire character. Sometimes, though, the person being impersonated refuses to sit quiet, and that's where things get even better. Michael Caine became the subject of countless impressions over the years, particularly from comedians such as Steve Coogan and Rob Brydon. Their versions of Caine became recognizable in their own right, but eventually, the real Michael Caine was there to hear them, and instead of becoming offended, he played along. That's a huge part of what makes these moments work. A celebrity can either fight the joke or become part of it. When they choose the second option, the audience gets something much better. They get to see the real personality behind the famous image. The celebrity stops being untouchable. They become another person in the room, laughing at exactly the same joke as everyone else. But celebrity impressions aren't limited to actors and comedians. Some of the most memorable impressions have involved political figures, and few were performed on a bigger stage than Jamie Foxx's impression of Barack Obama during the inauguration period. The scale alone made the moment unusual. The source describes the performance as taking place in front of a crowd of around 1.8 million people. That's an enormous audience for any performance. And political impressions work for a very specific reason. Politicians spend years developing recognizable public personas. Their speeches are televised. Their voices are repeated constantly. Their gestures become familiar. Their expressions become familiar. So when a comedian reproduces those characteristics, the audience immediately understands the reference. Fox leaned into the recognizable rhythm and delivery associated with Obama and transformed it into comedy. The contrast was what made it work. You're watching someone who normally represents authority being turned into a comedy character. And when the audience already knows the original personality, the joke lands almost instant. Dana Carvey's impressions of George H.W. Bush created another interesting example. Carvey became famous for exaggerating Bush's voice and mannerisms. But instead of treating the parody as something hostile, Bush eventually acknowledged it himself. And that led to something nobody really expects from a political impression. A genuine friendship developed between the comedian and the person he was making fun of. That's rare, because political satire can easily become personal. But when both sides understand that the joke is part of entertainment, something completely different happens. The impression becomes a shared joke, not an attack, not an argument, just comedy. And sometimes, that's exactly how a joke turns into a relationship. Some of the funniest moments in the source material aren't necessarily the biggest names. They're funny because the impression comes completely out of nowhere. Emily Blunt, for example, has demonstrated how an impression can turn a simple story about Tom Cruise into a much more entertaining anecdote. Instead of simply explaining how Cruise behaved on set, she recreates the personality. Suddenly, the audience isn't just hearing a story, they're watching it, and that's the power of a good impression. It can take something that happened several years ago and make it feel like it's happening again. The same thing happens when comedians imitate someone like Jeremy Clarkson. The performance isn't simply about copying his voice. It's about capturing the attitude, the confidence, the dramatic reactions, the way every tiny disagreement can somehow become a life or death issue. That's what the audience recognizes. And once again, the voice is only the beginning. After watching all of these moments, there's one thing that becomes obvious. The greatest impressionists aren't really copying people, they're studying them. They watch how someone talks, how they pause, how they react, how they move, what words they repeat, what happens when they get angry, what happens when they get excited. And then they take those little details and turn them into comedy. That's why the best impressions feel almost unsettlingly accurate, because somewhere inside the exaggeration, there's a little piece of truth. And when the real celebrity starts laughing, that's when you know the impression has worked. They recognize themselves, maybe a little too well. At the end of the day, the funniest part about a great celebrity impression isn't the impressionist. It's the reaction of the person being impersonated. Because for a few seconds, they get to see themselves from somebody else's perspective. They hear their own voice. They see their own mannerism. And suddenly, all those little things they never thought about become obvious. Some celebrities laugh. Some try to fight back. Some immediately attempt an impression of the impressionist. And some simply sit there wondering how someone managed to get them that accurately. That's why these moments are so memorable. They're not just celebrity impressions. They're celebrities seeing themselves in a completely different way. And honestly, when the person you're impersonating is laughing harder than everyone else in the room, you know you've done it right. If you had to pick just one, which celebrity impression was the best? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy these kinds of celebrity stories, subscribe, because there are plenty more moments where Hollywood's biggest stars completely lost control of the situation. Thanks for watching.